when we went through what historians call the nadir of our existence as black folk in this country, the way we survived was to come inwardly and build our churches, build our colleges, build our institutions, and then use those as a base to respond. And so we're at a time now where we have to do that kind of institution building. And the only way to do that is to consolidate our wealth.
Greetings, my posse. Welcome to the Roundup with Rodney and Rodney. This is Rodney J. Littles.
And I'm Rodney Butler. Hey, Rodney, man, we made it to December. How you feeling, brother?
Oh, man, chilly. It's been cold, bro. Yeah, but at least we didn't get any snow.
Yeah.
The Midwest and the Northeast, they got their fair share. So I'm not complaining.
And, if anything down here, we would get ice more than likely. And, last time we had the Snowmageddon or Ice-Mageddon, whatever it's called, back in 2016. So no, we don't need no precipitation in Atlanta. But anyway, man, well, good to see you. What we have tonight, Rodney?
Well, we got Bobby X. Fryle. He's going to let us know what's going on and turn up the heat. Come on, Bobby, what you got for us today?
Gentlemen, how you doing? Glad to see you.
Good, brother. Good to see you as always.
Hey, first, I want to give a shout out to the Georgia Bulldogs, SEC champions. Yes, sir. Go Dogs.
They ain't real good. The Dogs ain't real good.
They ain't real good. So I'll get right into it without any more hesitation. Hey, I was brought to this week a topic about Schedule F. And for those that don't know what Schedule F is, I'll just give it in a brief summary. Donald Trump wants to go back to a policy he initially implemented towards the end of his term called Schedule F, where he can basically fire up to about 50,000 government employees, civil servants, and basically replace them with whoever he wants, his sycophant, so to speak. So just to summarize, that's what Schedule F is about. And I thought it was interesting last week. I heard House Speaker Mike Johnson talking about basically taking a blowtorch to a number of federal agencies. He says here up to 75% cut of federal employees. Now, a lot of black people are federal employees that rely on, being a government worker.
18%, Bobby, 18%.
Yes, mm-hmm. Yes. So that just immediately triggered in my mind something that he said last week, which was basically about not just about the blowtorch comment, but he made a comment about there were a number of government offices and jobs that people aren't physically present there to do their job. And in his words, he says, a lot of Americans just don't want to put up with that type of stuff. Now, I don't know about you gentlemen, but it just goes to show just how out of touch someone like Speaker Johnson is and this conservative base in general. I don't know anyone who's upset, especially as an American here in this country, who's sitting around worried about who's physically present at their jobs and who isn't. Whether they be with the federal government or whoever, because a lot of people telework, and there are a lot of government employees that were hired in their contract to be allowed to do telework from home. Right. So to hear him make this a basis of something that Americans are tired of or just fed up with, it just shows not only again how out of touch they are, but it just shows their intentions when they come into office. This is all part of the plan, all part of the playbook. They've already outlined a Project 2025. So once again, the horns are being shown by these people who intend to come in and basically just wreck shop, if you ask me. Wreck shop. So Schedule F is again, that is the policy implementation that Donald Trump intends to implement once he comes in office. It will hurt a number of Americans, a number of employees. And I'm self-employed. My wife teleworks from home. And so she doesn't have to go into the office anymore, but there are a number of people who that is something that is extremely important to them because of their children, Maybe it's the distance they would normally have to drive to work. A number of Americans take care of their parents in their own homes. There's numerous reasons. It may be disabilities. There's numerous reasons why people now work from home. And the thing about it, why it doesn't make any sense about Speaker Johnson making this an issue, is that most people are more productive. If you have most employees will tell you, my employees are more productive working from home. It's not like there's some type of loss in production, some type of, we can't get this person to respond. No, it's usually now that's the way it is. That's the way things have gone now in the job world, where people look to be able to telework and work from home. So that's usually what a lot of people are looking for when they're, especially this generation, they're looking to be able to work from home and still be able to, every now and then, if you need me to come in the office, okay, I'll come. But it takes a lot of wear and tear off of their vehicles and amongst those other things that we mentioned before. So again, I just want to throw that out there for people to take for their own consumption about Schedule F, the dangers of it, what it means, what it's the roots of it, where it's coming from, and just to show you again, I just have absolutely nothing of nothing good about this administration coming in. Let's just put it that way. I don't feel it. So I just wanted to briefly get that out there, and people should look and Google it for yourself about Schedule F, what it means, what they're trying to do. That information is out there. And I just don't see this administration coming in having a clue about what everyday Americans really care about.
Excellent point. I didn't know about that. That's good information, Bobby. I appreciate it. I think folks do need to look into that.
And a couple of things to add to it, Bobby. And you asked the question when you first started talking about this is, who want for these people to come back in, to come to work, and I'm gonna tell you who wants them to come in, those plantation overseers.
And that's the image they're trying to create is, we got all of these black people. They're not in office. They're not coming into office.
And what people about to find out is that, it's more than just black people, like we talked about, before, about what a whole bunch of people who thought they was going to benefit from, the election of Donald Trump and the Republicans or whatever. They are about to be in for a rude awakening because they think that they are exempt. But I understand exactly what you're saying about a lot of people about to find out that they are on the plantation right along with black folks.
That's right. And the last point I'll make about this is it can be challenged in the courts. The problem is by the time there's actually a ruling on it, the damage have already been done. And by the way, even with that, it can be done by executive order.
And not only that, Bobby, it only take about 2 years. Once we do something in this country for about 2 years, it becomes a new norm. And people literally forget, that we used to do things this way. It'd be like, if you go to a 4-day work week, starting in 2025, by 2027, people act like there was never a 5-day work week. So the plan, they know that. They do the studies and everything to do that, to get that information. And the only other thing I would say is that the only people that are hurt from, people people going back commuting to work, first of all, the environment will be even more polluted. You have more accidents and illnesses and, people being around so many people. But, those developers, those downtown developers, because it's all about, I always say, right, if you want to know, if you follow the money, and the only person that's getting the money is usually some rich white guy at the top, right? Mm-hmm. And these developers in these downtown areas, and Rodney, we all know that they literally build business districts around people being on a doggone plantation. So, but good deal, Bobby. And I hope people really start to look. We've been warning, we've been tooting the horn on this platform and on all the Black Man's platform that, hey, we've been telling you, we almost tired of talking, but we're going to continue to talk. But anyway, appreciate it, Bobby.
Thank you, brothers. Elections have consequences.
Yes, sir.
Have a great show, gentlemen.
Thanks, Bobby.
Thank you, Bobby. Have a
See
great
you soon, brother.
You too. All right. Bye.
Well, that was very interesting, Rodney.
Yeah, you know, Bobby, every week he's gonna bring something
hit the nail on the head
he's gonna
today,
bring something to your show. Twice a month, and
when can we
yeah.
see Bobby? When can we see Bobby on the Black Man's Roundtable?
Well, Bobby, he does his first week, of the month, which would be, won't see Bobby on his show with the Roundup. I'm sorry, not Roundup, the local lookout with Rodney and Bobby. That'll be the first week in January. Hopefully we'll be able to do that show. Everybody will be coming off the holidays or whatever, but that's when we'll see him again. And hopefully we may see Bobby, if he's not vacationing, we may be able to see him on the next upcoming Roundup with Rodney and Rodney in a couple of weeks from now.
Yes, okay.
So we'll see what he got to bring.
Well, we have in the green room a outstanding individual, a civic and business leader, legal juggernaut, Mr. Rodney K. Strong, attorney, CEO and co-founder of Griffin Strong PC. Mr. Strong is currently the project principal for public policy consulting engagements with several states and local government entities. He's a member of the State Bar of Georgia. Attorney Strong represents a range of public entities and corporate clients, specializing in public contract, community development, and real estate law. In addition to his law practice, Mr. Strong also serves as the general counsel for the Fulton County, City of Atlanta Land Bank. He's very active in the community. And as a supplier diversity consultant on numerous projects, including the newly built Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia. Mr. Strong is widely considered one of the foremost national experts in the area of procurement disparity research, supplier diversity program development. His experience in these areas began in 1985 when the then mayor, Andrew Young, appointed him supplier diversity. So, welcome, Attorney Strong. Why don't you give us a little history on yourself? What brought you to this point? And why are you so interested in this particular subject and made it a career?
Well, first, just want to say it's great to be on the Black Man's Roundtable, and just really appreciate you all inviting me here. And I grew up during the Civil Rights Movement. I was in the first grade when the sit-ins started, and so I really literally grew up in the movement. I'm old enough to remember racial segregation, and I was 9 years old when the Civil Rights Act was passed that ended racial segregation, and I saw the change that came about, and I got a chance to observe African American attorneys make a difference. And I was in the fourth grade, and I made the decision right then I wanted to be a civil rights lawyer. And so when I was in about the sixth grade, Dr. King came to Memphis in response to the assassination attempt on the James Meredith, who had started a march from Memphis to Jackson, Mississippi, to march against fear. And he didn't get more than a few miles into Mississippi before he was shot down. And Dr. King came to Memphis, and he gave a speech that had a profound impact on me. And he continued to give that speech up until he ultimately was assassinated in Memphis 2 years later when I was in the eighth grade. And he talked about the fact that, we had learned how to have integrated lunch counters now. We didn't have to go to the back of the bus anymore. But and he said this very frequently, what good does it do a man to have integrated lunch counters if he can't buy a hamburger? And that the next frontier was economic justice. And so I said, well, that's what I'm interested in. Where, how can I get involved in economic justice? And I decided to stay focused in the area of, pre-law. And I came to Morehouse because that's where Dr. King had gone to school. A lot of other civil rights attorneys that I was familiar with in Memphis had gone to Morehouse. And my freshman year, Andrew Young ran for Congress and won. And I worked on his campaign. I volunteered, worked on his campaign. And then the next year, Maynard Jackson ran for mayor and won. And his big thrust was the 25% minority business program. He basically put in place a program where minority firms were to receive 25% of city contracts. They set a goal for 25% minority participation on contracts. And I said, wow, this is what I'm interested in. And so after I graduated, I worked for Maynard for 3 years. And then I went back to law school in my hometown, University of Memphis, for 3 years. Came back, and when I came back, by that time, Ambassador Young had become mayor, and he appointed me director of the Office of Contract Compliance. And I did that for 8 years. So I ran the City of Atlanta's Minority Business Program for 8 years. And we have a number of legal challenges under the 14th Amendment to our program. And we responded to those because we recognized that if they knocked out the program for the city of Atlanta, it would have national implications. And so we withstood the challenges, developed a methodology for municipalities responding to those types of efforts to end our program. And then I began my own practice. And primarily my practice focuses on representing governments. Most of my clients are governments. I represent most of the major governments in the metropolitan area that you can think of: Cobb County, Gwinnett County, Henry County, Clayton County. I do work all over, have done work for DeKalb. And I also do work all over the country. So we do work in New York. We're working in Erie County, New York right now. In Massachusetts, we got a couple of projects. We just did a project for the state of Connecticut. We're out west. We've done projects for Sound Transit and for the city of Tacoma. Down in Texas, we're doing a project right now for Lone Star College in Houston. We just did one for the Port of Houston. So we're all over the country basically doing the work. And of course, as the new administration comes in, we're facing a number of challenges. We're facing a crisis similar to the crisis we faced when I was in government 30 years ago. And so I'm just glad that the Lord left me around long enough to have one more good fight with these folks.
Well, we're lucky to have you, sir. Definitely, definitely, definitely. So based upon that segue, that was an excellent segue. How do you see the challenges for supplier diversity trickling down from the federal level based upon the intent that we've been hearing?
Yeah. Well, I couldn't help but hear your previous guest, and he was right on time in terms of talking about this Schedule F that the incoming Trump administration is planning. They had actually put it in place at the end of the previous administration that he headed. And of course, it was rescinded as soon as President Biden got in office. It's a direct attack on the federal workforce. And I think we ought to recognize that all of these attacks are really rooted in white supremacy, that they hold subtext. They're not explicit, but the subtext is, how do we put Black people back in a position as close as possible to their former condition of servitude?
Mm.
We don't want to compete with them. We do not want a level playing field. We don't want diversity. We don't want equity. And we sure don't want inclusion. And that's the underlying theme of this incoming administration. And so Black people are overrepresented, as I heard pointed out earlier on your program. I think we're 19% of the federal government workforce. So we're overrepresented in the federal workforce. That's not an accident. That's an artifact of history. What I mean by that is that after the Civil War, when the freed enslaved people were freed, very often private industry would not contract with them. And then once the federal troops were withdrawn in the infamous compromise that was talked about in the book called The Betrayal of the Negro, the Tilden Hayes Compromise, in 1876, and the federal troops were withdrawn, then the white supremacists reasserted themselves through legal and extra legal means. And one of the things that they did was to try to basically control black people's ability to get jobs in the private sector. And so the only really quality jobs that black people could aspire to were jobs in the public sector, particularly in the federal government. When there was a Republican at that time, they had the radical Republicans who were, had defeated the, pro-slave South and the boll weevil Democrats up north. And the only jobs we could get were government jobs. I know when I graduated from college, I went and visited my grandfather on our family farm down in Mississippi. And he said, well, son, what do you plan on doing? And I said, well, granddaddy, I plan on going to law school. He said, son, that's a whole lot of education to work at the post office.
Wow. Wow.
My grandfather fought in World War I. And, the people he went to school with who became lawyers, a lot of them ended up at the post office because they made more money at the post office than they could make practicing law because they weren't going to get any, none of the corporations were going to hire them.
Yeah.
The city governments weren't going to, employ them. They weren't going to have the kind of practice I have. And so he couldn't even imagine how a black lawyer could do very well. Most towns couldn't support more than 1 or 2 black lawyers,
Right.
And so the point I'm making is that when they go after federal workers, they're going after black folk. Let's be clear. And this is not the first time they've done it. When Reagan was elected in 1980, and he took office in 1981, the first thing he did was to slash the federal workforce. And the first department he went after was the Department of Education because African Americans are overrepresented in the Department of Education. There's a book by Thomas Byrne Etzel where he went into detail about how Reagan targeted the specific departments that had overrepresentation of African Americans to go after those jobs. And so last week I was in Bowie, Maryland. One of my college classmates passed away. I was up there sadly for a funeral. But as I was driving around all the nice areas up there and all the black folk living in the nice areas, I said, hey, these people are going to be hurting soon because these jobs will be attacked by the new administration.
Right.
Hope I didn't say too much on that.
No. That was great history. We appreciate that. So, in the state of Georgia, they recently, and I had the opportunity to work with you on this, passed a minority women business supplier diversity bill. State Representative Roger Bruce was the primary force behind that. I had the pleasure of working with him on that legislation and had your help on it also. So tell me, how is that going to mesh with what's happening with the national Republican agenda, and this current governor may have ambition for higher office?
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of ways to look at things. First, if you recognize that this attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, has its roots in the white supremacist movement. It has ties to the Council of Conservative Citizens, which is a modern day incarnation of the White Citizens Council. And, this guy, Chris Rufo, has ties to the white supremacist movement over in Europe. He just came back from doing some kind of fellowship, that he was given, in Europe, in one of the Eastern European countries that has deep ties to the Trump administration. And you've got all of these various people with, ties to this white nationalist movement that are in the party. Stephen Miller, of course, is going to be the chief of staff or the deputy chief of staff. And so, it's not an accident that when Trump came out the other day and did his first major interview on a mainstream, newscast on Meet the Press, he said, I'm going to end birthright citizenship. He was talking about black folk. I mean, if you read the newspaper accounts, I just looked at several articles where Fox News was saying, well, he was unfairly treated by Christian Welker in that interview because he didn't read the entire, because she didn't state the entire amendment. But the 14th Amendment to the Constitution was put in place by the radical Republicans after the Civil War. And it was a direct response to the Dred Scott case,
Right.
which came out prior to the Civil War. And Dred Scott v. Sanford. And Dred Scott had been enslaved in Virginia. And he was sold to an Army officer who took him into Illinois and Wisconsin territory, which was a free territory according to federal law. And he sued for his freedom. And it went back and forth through the courts, ultimately ended up in the Supreme Court of the United States. Anybody can look it up. They can ban books, but they can't ban the law of the United States. And anybody can just Google Dred Scott v. Sanford and read it. They can't ban that. And in it, the Supreme Court said that Africans, whether enslaved or free, are not citizens of the United States and have no rights which white people have to respect.
Yep.
And it further said that the founding fathers were good people and that they recognized that Africans were of an inferior order and totally unfit to associate themselves with white people. This is what the Supreme Court of the United States said. You don't have to go to some woke textbook, as the conservatives like to talk about. Go to the Supreme Court of the United States and read Dred Scott v. Sanford. The response to Dred Scott v. Sanford was the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. And the 14th Amendment to the Constitution says that if you are born in the United States, you are a citizen of the United States. This is not a law. This is a constitutional amendment. It required a 3/4 vote in the 2/3 vote in the Senate and in the House, and ratification by 2/3 of the states. And it is a part of the Constitution. So they talk about being constitutional conservatives, but they don't like that part of it because it says, that you are a citizen if you were born here. And what the conservatives have hung their hat on is, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. There's a clause in there that says you are a citizen of the United States if you are born in the United States, comma, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Well, that's been interpreted and that by the courts. And everybody understands that means that if you say are a diplomat from another country and your child is born here, but you really are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, because why? You are, you have diplomatic immunity. Then that's the exception that they were talking about. And they know that from legislative history, which is a normal way you look at things. It's a fringe idea that you can just decide that subject to the jurisdiction means anything you want it to mean. Okay?
Right.
But you got a president of the an incoming president, a once and past president of the United States, a future and past president of the United States, who's saying that. Well, why is he saying that? He's saying that because that's what the white supremacist movement said. Let's not sugarcoat this.
Right.
When J.D. Vance starts talking about people having more babies, he's not talking about having more black babies.
Right.
He's talking about we want more white babies. Okay. The concern that they have is one that's based on race. Now, they're not always explicit, but all you have to do is just scratch the surface. You don't have to scratch it an inch, scratch it a millimeter, and it oozes out.
That's a mouthful, sir. Well, what an education, huh, Rodney?
Absolutely. Rodney, I'm loving it. I'm sitting here, man. I'm sitting here just absorbing all of it because I know that these are the things that the viewers and the followers of the Black Man's Roundtable really want to hear. You know, just the down and dirty. They know when they come and watch this that they have to put the big girl pants and the big boy pants on, and Attorney Strong is making them pull them things all the way up. And I'm just appreciating the conversation.
Brother Attorney Strong, so let's talk about the Georgia situation. What do you see in the future for Georgia, again, with this new law that we gotten passed 2 years ago?
We're a nation of laws and not of men.
Mm-hmm.
And, power, as Frederick Douglass said, concedes nothing without demand. And in Georgia, we are always demanding. Our community is always demanding.
That's right.
When they used to have something called the white primary here in Georgia in the 1940s. And it was something that was prevalent around the South. It basically said that it was pioneered in Mississippi, actually, or I think around 1898. I might be wrong on the year. Could have been 1897. But anyway, in the 1890s, it was pioneered in Mississippi. But what they did was they ruled that the political parties were private organizations and they could let anybody participate that wanted to participate. So they said Black people can't participate in the Republican Party, in the Democratic Party, rather. And so the Democratic Party was all white. They had white primaries. And ultimately in the 1940s, the white primary system was ruled against by the Supreme Court. Took to the 1940s, litigation primarily headed up by the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Thurgood Marshall. Shout out to Black institutions. They were using Howard University Law School as a basis to create Black lawyers who were litigating these cases and were taking these cases to the Supreme Court and were arguing and winning these cases. And they ultimately ruled. And William B. Hartsfield, who was the mayor of Atlanta, said, well, we're going to have to make some changes because, Black folk in Atlanta about to get the vote. And I don't know about anywhere else, but the Black folk in Atlanta gonna know what to do with it. And he was right about that. Okay. And so, I've been fortunate enough, as I told you in my introduction, to have worked on Andrew Young's campaign. He was the first African American elected to the Democratic Party from the Deep South elected to the United States Congress since Reconstruction, from the South, from the Deep South.
Wow.
And Maynard Jackson was the first African American elected mayor of a major city in the Deep South since Reconstruction. Okay, and I had a chance to work on both of those campaigns, work for both of them. They were both my bosses. Okay, I'm fortunate enough that I've only had 3 bosses in my life: Maynard Jackson, Andrew Young, and myself. So
good for you. Wow, what a history.
So, but the reason I bring that up in response to your question, Rodney, is because we have the power to control the state government, and we know what to do with that power. And the Republicans know it. And so, Kemp has been more willing to do a few things, make a few accommodations, because he realizes that he's under pressure. The reason for that pressure is demographic, for one thing. African Americans have been tending to migrate to Georgia in very high rates.
Gotcha.
We've had a net gain of African Americans. Every 10 years, we've been having a net gain of about 1 million Black people in the metro area, all of whom have been available to vote. That's why you got a Black Democratic senator. That's why you got a Jewish Democratic senator here in Georgia. And so now, if you look at the numbers, every one of these races, they come down to about 200,000 votes.
Right.
And so if our community is organized and mobilized fully, we can elect anybody to any office. And so when you saw them cave in, finally, after begging all these years to put in place minority business legislation, it wasn't a reflection of anything other than the power that our community has evidenced at the voting booth.
And a Democratic candidate for mayor that looked like you and I. I mean, for governor that looked like you and I.
Hey,
at the time.
At the time, and she lost in the same race that
Warnock.
Senator Warnock won.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Okay, and then so if you look at the demographics and look at the numbers, you see where you see exactly what she won, where the precinct she won in, and where he won, and you see where her drop off was compared to his. And you see where Kemp overperformed her. I mean, overperformed Herschel Walker. Okay. You see what I'm saying? There were certain metro counties on mostly Cobb, Gwinnett, some other counties where you can see that Kemp overperformed, where Herschel Walker was. And then you see some places and looking at the black vote even where she underperformed. And so you see that there's a path, for more African American political power. And as Dr. King used to say all the time after the passage of the 65 Voting Rights Act, the most important step the Negro can take is that short step to the voting booth.
To the voting booth, right?
That's right.
That's right.
Yes. Better words have never been spoken.
That's right.
So now, okay, so how do we protect ourselves? How do we move in a direction in the state and the nation in order to not lose all of the gains that we've made, particularly in the private sector? That's where the most return on investment seems to occur. Corporations that have these successful programs have good bottom lines. So there's a big difference between government incentives and private corporations incentives. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So let's be real clear. And I think that there is a fallacy to a certain degree in the minds of some people in our community, because I don't think there is a full understanding of why they're in the positions that they're in. Sometimes you're in a position and you think you're in a position. I think Ann Richards, the former governor of Texas, when she was talking about George H.W. Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, at the Democratic convention, she said that he was born on third base and thought he hit a triple.
I understand the analogy, having played baseball.
Yeah. And so I think that there are a lot of black people that are sitting in positions that don't understand why they're there. As a lawyer, I understand why people are there. Like, for instance, take a company like the company, I think they're called Hillsdale or something like that, that owns Houston's restaurant. That's a good example. There are several restaurants like that, Applebee's, Houston's, few other, that kind of restaurant, sort of mid-market, not fine dining, but, popular mid-market restaurants. I can remember about 30 years ago, you would walk into these restaurants, you wouldn't see any black people as maitre d's. You wouldn't see any black people as servers, which was unusual in the South, because that was one of the better jobs for black folk back during segregation, was being a maitre d', being a servant. But all of a sudden, when it became lucrative, we weren't in those jobs for a while.
Okay.
And there was a lot of EEO, equal employment opportunity, litigation about it. Okay. And all of a sudden, they started hiring folk. Now you walk in a Houston's or you walk in an Applebee's and you see a young black woman and she's handing you the menu. That didn't just happen, you know. Same thing with you walk in Wells Fargo or you walk in Bank of America and you see black people as tellers and you see black people as you go say, well, I need to see the branch manager. And you go in there and it's a black woman or it's a black man. That didn't just happen. Maynard Jackson threatened to move all of Atlanta's money to Birmingham if each of the major banks in Atlanta didn't hire somebody black. So the point I'm making about the private sector is oftentimes the private sector needs a nudge from the public sector. You know, if you just Google how many executive orders have been put in place requiring anybody who does business with the federal government to hire black people on an equal employment basis. That's why so many times you go in almost any job you go to, you see at the bottom, we're an equal opportunity employer. That didn't just come from nowhere. That comes as a result of federal executive orders that started being put in place as early as the 1940s when A. Philip Randolph demanded that Roosevelt required defense industries to hire black people during the early part of World War II and said, if you don't, we're going to have a march on Washington. And Roosevelt capitulated and issued the first executive order in about 1941. And it's a series of executive orders all the way up through the 1960s. You know, when you had Executive Order 11246, which everybody knows about, which requires the Federal Office of Contract Compliance Programs. So the point I'm trying to make is not saying that the private sector isn't critical. The private sector is critical, but recognize that the private sector is doing this because they're under scrutiny. And there are requirements. And so they didn't just wake up and say, we want to do this. Now, there is some demographic pressure on the private sector now because black people have been, over the last 60 years, integrated well enough into the economy that there are certain incentives for them not, especially consumer-facing companies, you know, to do business with black people and to treat black people fairly, you know, when it comes to employment.
That's the bottom line.
But these things are not automatic. And that's what makes this new administration and their anti-DEI initiative so pernicious. Because as they begin to attack diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're also attacking equal employment opportunity. And so what we're going to have to do as a community is we're going to have to be more aggressive about litigating equal employment opportunity cases against these companies. When companies are discriminatory, it's not hard to spot. Okay, for instance, Tesla is a racist company. The fact that you've got Elon Musk supporting Trump is no surprise. You just Google it and you'll see that they're under consent decree from the California Civil Rights Commission. They're treating black people in a horrendous way. And Musk has been all down with that. Okay. Because what is he? He's a South African expatriate, an Afrikaner.
That's right.
Okay. He's just treating black folk like he learned how to treat black folk.
That's right.
Yeah,
okay.
That's right.
So we got to recognize that, you know, everything that we see today, you know, you go in a store and you see black people everywhere and all, that didn't happen. And they're trying to reverse it.
Got it.
And you read Project 2025, they want to cut back EEOC.
Yes,
and so we, as black lawyers, are going to have to be aggressive about filing lawsuits against companies, about class action lawsuits. And of course, there are no guarantees about what the Supreme Court is ultimately going to do when it comes to employment law. They have tried in the past to cut back on protections in employment law. Matter of fact, they cut back on some of the standards in employment law during the Reagan administration. And ultimately, because of the strength we had in Congress, the civil rights movement, and Jesse Jackson particularly was at the forefront of this, they passed the Civil Rights Act of 1992. Most people don't even realize there was a Civil Rights Act in 1992, but the Civil Rights Act in 1992 restored a lot of the employment provisions and strengthened a lot of the employment provisions that had been weakened during the Reagan administration and the early part of the Bush administration by the Supreme Court. They wanted to cut out the disparate impact test, which I'm not going to get into the legal weeds about that. But the bottom line on it is the law was passed in 1992. Pat Buchanan, who was a white supremacist, open, notorious white supremacist, ran against George H.W. Bush because he signed the Civil Rights Act of 1992. He said he got incensed. He was like, me finally getting a chance to get these Negroes back in place. And you're going to go sign a law that lets them get off the mat.
Well, now, based upon everything that you've been talking about, and you evaluating these programs for supplier diversity around the country, and the history of how these programs came to being, would you not agree that it was freedmen, descendants of chattel slavery, that a lot of these programs were developed because of the way we were treated during the periods of history you've talked about, and that once these programs started getting traction, then the floodgates opened, and now you have about a dozen different categories of preference, and the preference that this was all started on was to address the issue of chattel slavery and the impact of slavery in this country. And in my mind, it was a sort of reparations in that they were trying to develop programs and laws that began to level the playing field, so to speak, not give you a big advantage, but level the playing field. And then somehow over the recent years, everybody and their mama's benefiting from what was designed to deal with the chattel slavery issue. Am I off base?
You're not off base at all. But let me be clear about this. Okay. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was put in place, and they actually put women in at the last minute. That was a last minute addition to the 64 Civil Rights Act. Now, and just so you know, J.D. Vance has already put in place has already put an anti-DEI piece of legislation into the Senate, and it's being heard in the House right now, which would cut back the 64 Civil Rights Act. He's not even in office yet, and he's already introduced that as a senator.
So you're going to hurt white women along, just their collateral damage then? Is that what it is?
That doesn't matter. And they recognize that they get their benefits from, let me rephrase that.
White women didn't need that.
They are not as concerned, obviously, as we are, because if they were, I believe they would have voted differently.
That's a good point. Excellent point.
So, I mean, that's the only point I can make. And Rodney Littles, to your question, the federal government put in place a program. Put in place a program. Federal government program was put in place primarily under the Nixon administration.
Correct. That
was the early part of the program.
Correct.
And then they put in place certain definitions, for minorities and women. And because it's a national program, depending on where you are, there are places in the country where Hispanics were discriminated against. There are places in the country where Native Americans were discriminated against. There are places in the country like Southern California where Asians, Japanese were interred. And so so they used national definitions.
Right.
And we tended to be in that, isolated in our own regions. In other words, if you went to San Antonio, it was mostly Hispanic folk. If you went to, it was some black folk, but mostly Hispanic folk. If you went to Southern California, it was some black folk, but it was a lot of Asians, a lot of Hispanics. So the federal government put in place these various categories. So in 1989, all of these programs were being challenged. The programs got put in place in the 70s under the Surface Mass Transportation Act of 1977, which was sponsored by Mitchell.
Parent Mitchell. Yep. Congressman Parent Mitchell.
Congressman Parent Mitchell got that passed in Congress, Surface Mass Transportation Act of 1977, that created the federal DBE program.
That's correct.
Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program.
Yes, sir.
And that program was upheld by the Supreme Court in a case called Fully Love versus Klutznick. So once that case was upheld by the Supreme Court, most lawyers looked at it and said, this is how the Supreme Court said. They say this is constitutional. So most state and local programs were modeled after the federal program. So the reason you see these various categories that are replicated in these programs all over the country is because everybody modeled their drafting of their programs after the federal program, because the Supreme Court had ruled that Fully Love that, you know, that this was the law of the land.
Right.
In 1989, and I was director of contract compliance, and I was also on the National Lawyers Panel for the Minority Business Legal Defense Fund at the time. The Supreme Court ruled that the city of Richmond had overstepped its bounds by having an equal business opportunity program or a minority business program. And so what they said in that case, it was written by Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, was that you had to have specific evidence of discrimination that was narrowly tailored to address the discrimination in your specific marketplace. And she specifically criticized the very point you're making. She said that you have given a preference to Eskimos and Aleuts, but there is no evidence, and she says this in the Supreme Court decision, there is no evidence that there are even any Eskimos or Aleuts in Richmond, Virginia. So now local programs are actually designed and tailored to the specific ethnic groups that can show that they have been discriminated against in that particular marketplace. And that's why when we do a disparity study, we're looking at the availability of minority firms, because that's the criteria the Supreme Court said you had to use, versus utilization. Right. And then we're drafting a program that is narrowly tailored to address the discrimination we find for that specific group.
Okay.
Now, George Lanou, who's been an expert who testifies frequently against disparity studies, just wrote an article where he was arguing that, you know, these categories are too broad. But a well-done disparity study would already have figured that out. And a well-done program would already be narrowly tailored to address the specific people
right.
who are being impacted in that area. Okay.
Right.
And
right.
so the problem that you're speaking of is more of a federal government program problem with the federal DBE program
right.
than it is a problem with state and local government programs. And so now, though, there have been more recent decisions that have just come out this year at the lower court level. They're not Supreme Court decisions that are going to require and are already requiring modifications of the federal program. So we're in a state of flux because
right.
we have two things happening simultaneously.
Right.
We have a very conservative Supreme Court that is cutting back on a lot of the things that we have historically done to try to level the playing field and create a more diverse, more equitable, more inclusive society.
Right.
And we have an administration that is overtly committed to creating a less diverse, less equitable, and less inclusive society. But yet there are still laws against discrimination. And so where we're moving to now is to a period where we're going to be much more attuned to developing programs that are very, very narrowly tailored to address specific discrimination we find against African Americans in particular, because at the end of the day, as we all know, the discrimination that African Americans face is much more pernicious.
It's institutional
in the South,
because
we're dealing with institutionalized anti-Black racism.
Right.
And so the idea that you that the Supreme Court is going to cut out all ability to litigate around issues of discrimination or to develop any way for a government or a corporation to ameliorate overt discrimination in its workforce, I think is a bridge too far, even for this Supreme Court. Although you never know,
You never
because
know.
some of the rulings that they've had in the last year have made me say, I don't know what they're gonna do, And that's
Right.
as talking to somebody who's, who graduated from law school 41 years ago. So, I haven't, I'm not gonna say what they won't do, but
Right.
I do know that the future is aggressively litigating and
Right.
aggressively legislating around
Right.
specific identifiable discrimination. And quite
Got it.
frankly, there's enough anti-Black racism out here
Right.
for us to be busy ad infinitum in the United States on that issue.
Let me bring it home to Georgia for a minute. The state's program has not developed any goals. What do they need to do in order to actually create a program with goals?
Yeah, they would have to do a really very detailed disparity study, which is really an availability utilization factual predicate study. They would have to determine what the availability of minority firms were. They'd have to determine it by ethnic group with some degree of specificity, and they'd have to be very careful about how they defined, those specific ethnic groups that would be that are being discriminated against. They'd have to because state and local governments are subject to this Croson decision that I referenced earlier. And so they would have to go through a process. We've done it for the state of North Carolina. My firm did it for the state of North Carolina. We just completed a study for the state of Connecticut. And you know enough about this, Rodney, to know that each state requires a very detailed finding. And in this environment, where you have a hostile federal government,
right,
and very conservative Supreme Court, you have to have a very persuasive analysis, which would include an availability utilization analysis, regression analysis, anecdotal evidence, and then you could do some goal setting.
Gotcha.
And of course, if the evidence led in that direction.
Right.
But we know Georgia well enough to know that, I mean, come on. We know how they do business in Georgia.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well,
and we know we're not getting it.
Well, exactly. So, which is a great segue to my next question. So based upon studies that you've seen in the country, in the region, in the state, are African-American Black-owned businesses still underutilized, or are they overutilized? And who's being overutilized, if anybody?
So, Black people are generally underutilized in most jurisdictions. Of course, you would imagine that that's the case. But there are jurisdictions where we do find overutilization in certain categories. And what we call that is concentration. And what do I mean by that? In the case that required the federal government to have some type of analysis, it's called Adirondack Constructors versus Pena. It was a company that did guardrails. And they sued saying that minority-owned companies were getting all of or DBE rather, companies were getting, disadvantaged business enterprise companies were getting all of the guardrail business.
Okay.
Because what was happening is there weren't any DBE companies that actually could lay down the asphalt for the road.
Right.
In order to meet the goal on the project, all of the major general contractors were giving the guardrail company to DBEs, guardrail business rather, to DBEs.
Right.
And that's called over concentration, right? When you just, and so you're not spreading it out and you're not creating opportunity. So I think when I look at this landscape, I say that there are several things that we have to do. One, we have to create some sources of capital, some pools of capital that are not discriminatory. And we know that we're getting very little of the venture capital that we ought to be
That's
getting.
correct. That's correct.
They're not just attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're also attacking ESG, environmental and social governance. They're going after companies like BlackRock, saying if you have ESG policies, you're not going to get pension fund investments from Texas and Oklahoma and Florida and these companies, these states that they target.
Wow.
But we've got to be using all of our resources. We got to be going to ground to get all of our resources behind acquiring some companies, African American owned companies, other minority owned companies that can actually perform at the general contractor level in some of these, in some of these categories where we have been excluded. And largely we're excluded from those categories that require substantial capital investment.
And bonding.
Right. And so, so there are a lot of things a lot of tools in the toolbox that you can use. And so I tell people all the time, I don't care what the Supreme Court says. I don't care what the Trump administration does. We don't have to speculate. We just have to understand exactly what the new regime is, what they put in place, and then figure out how we use those rules, those laws, those findings to benefit and move forward the economic development of our community. And so we've got to be intentional. We've got to be organized. We got to be focused, and we have to be unified. Rodney, you and I might be the only ones old enough to remember, but we used to have a slogan, unity in the community.
That's right. That's right.
and that's what we have to have.
Yes, sir. I got you. That's a tall task in this day and time, unfortunately. Brother Butler, what do you have for me?
Hey, like I said, man, just absorbing everything and a lot of things that Attorney Strong talked about. We hit those things, on the Black Man's Roundtable, but it was such a refreshing, to have him to talk about those things from a legal perspective, which is one of the reasons that we wanted him, on here, because, none of us are lawyers. And so, but to have, Attorney Strong on here to just really shine a light on so much about what we talked about, put numbers on it, put, actual cases on it. I hope that people are listening. We've warned people before the election that, and I talk about a lot, Rodney, that their number one thing to go after is that 1964 Civil Rights Act. That is what they, for 60 years, it has been in the making. People think that Project 2025 is something that just came about. But the Heritage Foundation been working on that thing for years, and a lot of it is about to come to fruition. And, there's things that they're going to do in the first, 2 years, while I don't really foresee them losing too much, but I'm no Nostradamus, but just based on, the historical facts that I know about, Black history, African American history, in the United States, especially since, the Reconstruction, then a lot of things are just really repeating itself right now. I talk a lot about that. I believe that we are somewhere, maybe 1918 time frame based on, what I know about history. So I'm just so glad that Attorney Strong was able to, bring home and really, shine a light on so many things that we've talked about. And Attorney Strong, I'm just so glad that using that phraseology, because words matter, and he, racism, that word has become so, I don't know, it's become so, they've turned it into just another, it's almost liquid, but I love the fact that Attorney Strong talked about anti-Blackness, because that's what it truly is. Because, you can talk about racism here in the United States, but if you travel, if you get to go places like myself and others and some of you guys, anti-Blackness is a world thing. And so I'm glad that he really brought that phraseology into the discussion. But other than that, Rodney, just appreciating it, man.
Attorney Strong, when are you gonna be doing your book, man? I mean, you gotta have a book in the works, bro. Come on now.
Got to.
You can't. You gotta present us with something, man. Come on.
Well, I'm glad that you are
Uh-oh, he got an
encouraged.
announcement to make. No.
I'm glad you're encouraging that. I actually have have been kicking around a couple of concepts, and so
Cool.
Good.
the hard part, unfortunately, is the day to day
Yeah.
of practicing law and then trying to do what you can.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, I'm one of those people that believes that if you do everything you can do, then God will do the rest.
That's right.
And so, you know, I have known Vice President Harris since 2003. I was a co-sponsor of her first fundraiser here in Atlanta when she ran for district attorney the very first time. We held it at the World Trade Club down. It used to be down on the ground floor of the SunTrust Plaza, and Mayor Shirley Franklin, was our headline sponsor for the event, and that was the first time I'd really heard her speak. And I knew right then that she was, not an ordinary elected official. And so when she got the nomination, I put a lot of time, a lot of effort into doing everything I could. I realized it was an uphill battle. And I also, as the campaign wore on, and I recognized that we still had the same problem we had back in 1984 when my former boss, I was working for Andrew Young when we were working on the Mondale campaign. And we had things we wanted them to do, but the people who were in control of the, money that went on to, television, uh, weren't going to put the money that we wanted into the streets the way we felt that it needed to be, or give us the messaging that we needed on, black media. And Andy came out and said, the problem we got with this campaign is it's run by a bunch of smart ass white boys. I don't know if you remember that. So I'm just going to echo that and say we had, the same kinds of things going on this campaign. And so we came up short this time. And so I say that to say this, Rodney. All you can do is all you can do. And so I've had some wins and I've had some losses. We lost with Reagan in '81 and lost with, Dukakis in '88, Mondale in '84, Dukakis in '88, and so you get some wins and you get some losses. A lot of people say, well, the Democrats haven't done that much. Look, if you can just keep them from attacking us, you can keep them off me, you've done enough. Okay, because I can do the
Really.
rest.
Right.
I mean, as one of my favorite artists, James Brown, used to say, I don't want nobody to give me nothing. Just open up the door. I'll get it myself.
Man,
That's right.
get it myself. I heard that, bro. Yeah, one of my son's favorite artists.
Yeah.
Well,
So bottom line on it is, Rodney, and Rodney, now that this is over, and I appreciate, I use the phrase that you all have been that I heard you use, Rodney, a little bit earlier. I'm certainly no Nostradamus, and I'm not trying to be a Nostradamus. But each time they make a move, then our job is to intellectually assess what they're doing and figure out a counter strategy for our community. And that's really how we're going to proceed now that they're in power, as we navigate this. But I don't feel no ways tired. I feel that we're gonna be all right.
well, if we need it out of slavery, then we can make it through this. I believe that. And with good brothers like the two of you on the show, speaking truth to power and doing the work that you do, I have faith that we're going to get through this. Attorney Strong, how does someone get a hold of you? What are some of the services that you might provide that folks might be interested in terms of your firm?
Well, my clients right now are primarily government. That's 90% of our client, and probably the other 10% are major corporations, that we're doing work for, utilities and other major corporations. Not doing a whole lot that is uh, that's consumer facing. But I'm taking a hard look at us setting up an EEOC practice because I think we're going to have to litigate a lot. Plaintiffs EEOC practice because I think in these coming years, as they begin to strip away at our protections and go after people, I think there's going to be a lot of litigation because I think these companies, especially the ones who didn't want to have us in there anyway, I think they're feeling themselves, and we want to make them get a little pushback on that. And also, one of my areas that we're really looking at with our firm is wealth management, and so we're right now developing a wealth management division because as the Black community, we have to bolster our institutions. That's the only way we survived when they came after us after the Plessy v. Ferguson decision in 1896, when we went through what historians call the nadir of our existence as Black folk in this country. The way we survived was to come inwardly and build our churches, build our colleges, build our institutions, and then use those as a base to respond. And so we're at a time now where we have to do that kind of institution building. And the only way to do that is to consolidate our wealth. So you'll hear some announcements from our firm, both about our EEO practice and our wealth management practice, but we're not really ready to roll those out yet. But we're in the process of developing those business plans and putting the people in place to properly service our community. And then we'll develop those as consumer-facing elements to our practice soon.
And Rodney, I want to say before we let Attorney Strong get out of here, I know that a lot of the listeners tonight of this episode is like, oh man, they feel a little disappointed because because he's not doing a lot of personal kind of things as far as his firm. But I must remind people that even though you got to understand, we talked about it on this episode, which is that a lot of the anti-Blackness that we feel here in the United States is institutional. So when we have, firms like what Attorney Strong out there is doing institutionally, he's helping the masses because a lot is going to come down. If you were to do what Rodney Littles and I have been telling you, and that is to read, Project 2025. We've pointed out different aspects, the main 10 aspects of Project 2025 on this platform that we thought would really have the most impact on our community. Then you will appreciate that Attorney Strong and his firm is out there doing the institutional work rather than the individual stuff that's going to come our way, because they're coming after us in droves. So Attorney Strong, so look, again, don't be disappointed. Just know that he is one of those that's out there doing that. And also one more thing before we let Attorney Strong out of here, Rodney, I forgot to ask Attorney Strong in the pre-show stuff is Attorney Strong, what is the K for in your middle name? Keith is mine too, brother. So we got Rodney Keith.
Oh,
Rodney Keith. Anyway, Rodney, close it out, bro.
Your mother and my mother must have been thinking alike.
Well, any closing comments, Attorney Strong?
No, I just wanted to say it's just an honor to be able to be on this forum. And one last thing I did want to mention is that I'm serving as general counsel to a new political action committee that's been formed. It's called the Million Man Movement. The Million Man Movement. This is coming year is going to be the 30th anniversary of the Million Man March. And so the Million Man Movement was started as a Political Action Committee, and I'm serving as general counsel, and they're going to be doing some exciting things, and so you'll be hearing from them soon too.
Right. Thank you so much. Appreciate your visit with us. We'll be having you back on again as we get into the new year to bring us up to date on the progress of the new units in your firm and the issues of the day that we need someone with your background experience about economic opportunity and equal opportunity in our country. Thank you, sir.
Peace, brother. Peace.
Thank you.
Well, that was enlightening.
Yeah, Rodney, it looked like we got another episode to where, well, you know what? Sooner or later, we're going to get to our hot topics and spotlight and all that stuff. And I know we talked about it on the last episode, but we have such good, special guests. They have so much to say that we always running well over an hour by the time they're finished.
Yeah, no problem, my brother. Well, I'm hoping to have a retiring state rep who's agreed to play Santa Claus for our last show of the year.
Absolutely.
State Representative Roger Bruce.
Yep.
The godfather of the city of South Fulton.
Yep. We'd be glad to have Rep Bruce back on again, man. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, and the author of the Supplier Diversity Program for the state of Georgia. Well, it's time to wrap it up, my brother.
Wrap it up, brother.
You can catch the Roundup with Rodney on the second and fourth Thursdays of every month at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Like and subscribe to the Black Man's Roundtable on Facebook and YouTube. We are also on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, we'll keep rounding them up.
Peace, Rodney. Great show, man.
All right.
Don't forget to check us out on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Do you have show ideas or want to be on the show? Shoot us an email at blackmansroundtable@gmail.com. And please follow us on Facebook.